During this past week, Israel and Hamas conducted a tense hostage and prisoner swap. The exchange turned chaotic as crowds of Palestinians surged to glimpse Israeli captives. Hamas freed 8 hostages, including 3 Israelis and 5 Thai workers. The event angered Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who briefly halted the release of Palestinian prisoners. The deal was part of a 42-day ceasefire brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. Hamas handed over 3 Israeli hostages: Agam Berger, 20 years old, an Israeli soldier; Arbel Yehud, 29 years old; and Gady Moses, who's almost 80. 5 Thai agricultural workers were also freed. But crowds in Khan Yunis surrounded the hostages during the transfer, prompting Netanyahu to condemn Hamas for its brutality. In that southern city of Gaza, armed militants struggled to control the crowds who had gathered in thousands and who were chanting right outside the home of slain Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Photographs showed Arbel Yehud, one of the last female hostages in Gaza, escorted by gunmen through throngs of crowds. Gady Moses navigated tight crowds before reaching the Red Cross officials. Netanyahu called the scenes shocking and demanded safer transfer for future exchanges. Hamas, battered by months of Israeli military operations, gains precisely what it needs from this ceasefire, which is time. Hamas will use this time to exploit and to regroup its fighters, reposition its rockets, and rebuild tunnels. Meanwhile, Israel surrenders its momentum in this 15-month-long war. Every day the IDF pauses its campaign, it allows Hamas to rearm and entrench its control over Gaza. For Hamas, the hostage swap is not an act of goodwill or temporary pause. It is an act of currency. Each released Israeli hostage buys international legitimacy. It bolsters Hamas's narrative of being the sole keepers of Gaza. By contrast, Israel's release of Palestinian prisoners, many of whom were convicted for terrorism, rewards violence. It also risks future attacks. Releasing as many as 1,500 prisoners, including some of them masterminds of suicide bombings, is not just a security gamble. Many in Israel are calling it a moral capitulation. The release of these prisoners also signals to the Palestinians and to the international community at large that terrorism pays. Benjamin Netanyahu has been clinging on to power amid plummeting approval ratings and corruption trials. He's clearly prioritized his own short-term political survival over Israel's long-term security. The ceasefire allows him to placate hostage families and their very vocal supporters who've been at his case for the last almost year and a half. But questions are now being asked about the cost of this. By halting military operations before Hamas is entirely dismantled, which was one of the express objectives that was given by Netanyahu before he launched this campaign, that leaves Hamas very much intact to carry out a repeat of the October 2023 massacre. While freeing hostages is the moral imperative here, negotiating with Hamas sets a dangerous precedent. It incentivizes future kidnappings. It undermines Israel's long-standing policy of no concessions and no dialogue with the terrorists. This particular swap this past week marked the 3rd exchange under this truce. Hamas has pledged free 33 hostages in exchange for 1,500 Palestinian prisoners. Israel released over 110 prisoners this past week. In the first tranche, 32 of them were serving life sentences. Palestinians in Ramallah awaited updates outside a government center. The 2023 Hamas attack killed over 1,200 Israelis and abducted 250. Israel's retaliatory strikes in Gaza have caused more than 45,000 deaths as per local health officials, and it has displaced millions. Fighting paused for the truce with another swap that was expected over the weekend. Hamas announced the names of 3 more hostages, including an American citizen whom it said it would release the weekend as part of the ceasefire deal. Those 3 hostages have been named as well as Yarden Baibas, 35 years old, Ofer Calderon, 54 years old, and Keith Siegel, 65, who's an American Israeli. Israel is slated to release, in exchange for these 90 Palestinian prisoners. Netanyahu paused the prisoner releases over safety concerns, but it resumed after mediators assured him of future safeguards. Hamas claimed that the crowds that had gathered in Khan Yunis symbolized Palestinian resilience. Prime Minister Netanyahu is all set to meet President Donald Trump of the US at the White House this week. The talks will focus on extending the Gaza ceasefire. Netanyahu becomes the first foreign leader invited during Trump's second term. That's a signal of how much Trump is prioritizing the US-Israel relationship. It also underscores Trump's focus on ending the Gaza war first over other conflicts like the one in Ukraine. The ceasefire's first phase began just a day before Trump's inauguration, giving his administration early momentum, as well as some bragging rights. Trump had earlier warned Hamas to release the hostages before his swearing in, vowing that there would be hell to pay if the demands were not met. Hamas has perfected the art of weaponizing Gaza. By embedding fighters in hospitals and schools and residential areas, Hamas ensures maximum Palestinian casualties, and that is a tactic designed to turn global opinion against Israel. The ceasefire's humanitarian aid provisions will only deepen this. With Hamas still in power, the ceasefire does nothing to address Gaza's governance vacuum. So, once this ceasefire is over, Israel will soon face a stark choice. One, either to reoccupy Gaza, which is both a political and a military disaster, or simply allow Hamas to continue governing Gaza. Both options are catastrophic. The ceasefire's next phase hinges on further talks. Hostage families have urged officials to continue negotiations until all the captives are returned. The chaotic exchange that we saw this past week highlighted tensions in this rather tenuous ceasefire. While some hostages have been reunited with their families, many of them are still captive. The truce offers temporary respite, but lasting peace is very, very uncertain. This ceasefire is not peace. It is simply an intermission. Hamas survives to fight another day, Israel's security has been eroded, and the international community pats itself on the back for delaying the inevitable. When the truce collapses, as it will, the war will resume with greater ferocity. And when it does, Hamas will be stronger and savvier. It would have learned how to manipulate global opinion. Israel, on the other hand, would be politically fractured and morally exhausted. And it's going to face a very stark choice. And that is this. The hard truth is that there can be no lasting peace with Hamas. There are only two choices. Either Israel eliminates the group, or Hamas simply outlasts Israel. This ceasefire chooses the latter.